So remember, if you're solving some sort of a complex problem that is riddled with uncertainty and your scope is going to progressively evolve, then the way you plan for things also needs to progressively evolve. All right. When somebody asks you a simple question like, when are we going to be done? That is usually predicated on the assumption that done has already been finalized. Right. So if scope is going to be static, then you can ask a question like, when are we going to be done? Right. But if scope is constantly going to change, then done is also going to change. So you can't ask, when are we going to be done? That's a lagging indicator oriented question. A lagging indicator is always based on outcomes. You have to look at leading indicators. Leading indicators meaning, based on what we have done so far, considering the investment we have burned through so far, is it even valid for us to do another planning cycle and another planning cycle, another planning cycle? So you forecast over a period of time. So one of the ways of easily identifying if your organization is sort of digressed into waterfall and is pretending to do Scrum is to look for things like scope-oriented conversations. Are you fixing your scope on day one and then you're just artificially chunking it up into sprints? And if you are doing that, it's probably worth having a conversation with your management to say, hey, boss, the scope is going to change over time. So there is no point in us freezing this on day one and then doing sprints. The whole idea of doing sprints is we don't know whether we'll be able to get through all of this or not. We're trying to build confidence. Remember, in Scrum, you're trying to get better at predicting over time. So deliver in smaller chunks, retrospect, get feedback on that, and then you build on that. It's like driving through fog and mist in the air. When there's a lot of fog and mist in the air, your best friend is your ability to predict the next 50 meters. Now you have a whole bunch of options in your back pocket, like turning on the fog lights, windshield wipers, slowing down, looking at the weather app, but none of them are guaranteed to work until you actually deploy that method. Until you turn on the fog lights, you're not going to know if it works or not. Sprints are just like that. That means you're going to realize you're going to get effective or not once you run through a few sprints. So the first few sprints will dictate whether you'll succeed over a period of time or not. That means your first few sprints are experiments which will fail over a period of time. So they have to fail. When they fail, you will learn. And then over a period of time, the reason for that failure will plateau. That's what you're looking for. Right? So when you're looking for every single detail to be laid out, an easy way to have that conversation is create a definition of ready. A definition of ready is an entry criteria for every requirement that comes into your sprint. It's like a list of things that you need to get ready before you can plan. Like whenever you step outside the house, it's this definition of ready is your keys wallet check. Right? Do I have my driver's license? Do I have my keys? Have I done everything that I need to do before I get out of the house? So that keys wallet check is your definition of ready. Any requirement that doesn't meet the definition of ready, don't let it into the sprint. This definition of ready can be used to anchor all the conversations you have around scope. So if they're asking for all the possible details, just make sure you have a good definition of ready. And as soon as the requirement meets the definition of ready, keep moving on from there. Basically, that question is about planned versus unplanned work. That means you planned for the work on a Monday morning, but on a Wednesday, you have new stuff coming in, right? There are one or two ways of handling this. There isn't one approach that is better than the other. It just depends. Both of these come at a cost. It just depends on which cost you're willing to accept. So here's approach number one. The same team builds it, they ship it, they deploy it, and they maintain it. That means you own the whole thing. This is your baby until the death of this product. Now, this will come at the cost of you being a little smart about how you balance your capacity every sprint. That means, let's say you say 80% of our capacity in the sprint is going to be dedicated to planned work. The remaining 20% we will leave just in case something comes up. All right. Now, just in case defects come up or this last minute crisis pops up, you have 20% capacity. The problem though is, how do you predict that it's only going to be 20%? It can be 25%, can be 30%, can be 10%, right? So it's difficult to predict. One of the ways of how you can get better at predicting that time is with data. So you go through a few mistakes and you get a pattern of those mistakes, and then hopefully you can predict better. Another option would be that you just save 20% no matter how much work you get in the last minute. If you get 20% work, great. If you get more, then you have to swap something out. Now, if you swap something out, your sprint fails. If you get less than 20%, that means you plan for 80%, but no defects showed up. So you have 20% capacity remaining. You don't want to add more work to fill that 20% capacity. This is a big local optimization a lot of new teams will experience. The reason why you don't want to add more work is, now pay attention here, the rate of evolution of your scope needs to complement the rate of consumption of that scope. In Scrum, there is this concept called product backlog refinement. right? It's an ongoing activity where you're adding more work into your backlog. You're slicing and dicing it to make it better. The rate at which you're doing that rate needs to complement the rate at which you're pulling from the backlog also. Because if the rate at which you're adding exceeds the rate at which you're consuming, you end up with a very long product backlog, mismanaged expectations from the client. Or if the rate at which you're adding is less than the rate at which you're pulling in, then you end up in those sprint planning sessions that go on and on and on, those long and boring sprint planning sessions. They're usually a symptom of shallow product backlogs or shallow scope of work, right? So if you have 20% capacity remaining, then you don't pull in more work, but you go back to whatever you're already doing and think about optimizing that. So refactor that, automation, think about making that better, or maybe invest in some education, do some self-service stuff, learn a new skill or something like that. The reason why you don't want to mess with that scope is at the end of the sprint, you want to end up with whatever you said you would do. If you do more or you do less, you are not a very trustworthy team, and it's difficult for everybody else to predict whether you will deliver every time you say you deliver or not. So remember, doing more work is also not a great idea all the time. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. It depends on what kind of problem are you solving. If I, as a customer, I'm banking on you to deliver 10 things, you should deliver 10 things, not 15, not 8. Deliver 10 things so I can trust you over time. Because if you can get better at building trust over time, then you can predict the same thing over 10 months. But if you can't even be trusted for 1 month, then why would I trust you for 10 months? Right? So think about that the next time you want to take in more work in the middle of the sprint. Am I becoming unpredictable over time? That's the idea there, right? That's one option. Second option is easier option. It's more costlier, I guess. You stand up a production support team. One team does active development, another team does active production support, which means they will do the crisis management. This will come at the cost of standing up this extra team and ramping them up as your team ramps down, which means sprint over sprint, as you're doing your work, make sure in your sprint review, this new team is brought in as a stakeholder. So in your definition of done, make sure the production support team or this crisis support team has given you a check mark that yes, we are good with handling this if and when we get an issue. And so as you're ramping down, they start to ramp back up, right? So two options. One, stand up a separate team, ramp them up, pay that cost. Or second, the same team does all of it, balance capacity between 80-20, 70-30, that sort of a thing. And collect as much data as you can. So having data-driven conversation makes it easier over time.